I make references to my faith because it's so incredible when you see a child with special needs, and I speak about autism because that's what I know, but I understand across the board, whether it's Down syndrome, there is this, and I suppose that's how God works, because there's a because that child might perhaps be delayed or lacking in a particular area. In other areas, they are extremely gifted. And there's a heightened sense of sort of empathy and love that they have in their hearts, more than you've ever. It's pretty incredible. It's palpable, and the word special isn't, it's there for a reason, because you come into the presence of these children and it's like, my goodness, you may be sort of lacking, delayed in certain areas, but they have this ability, to draw people to them and for people to love them.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Against All Odds. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host. And this week we have another very good friend of mine. I always say people are my very good friends, but it's true. And this is someone I've known for many years, in the person of Sua Kyei. Sua is a senior compliance manager with over 12 years of multi-sector experience and in regulatory compliance. She currently works for F5, which is an American technology company, and has global responsibility for compliance, training, and communication across the business. And prior to joining F5, she was a compliance manager at Alix Partners, a renowned management consultancy, and worked as a paralegal to a premier Central American law firm, as well as the Bank of New York Mellon. Sua received a combined honours in law and French from Kingston University and a legal practitioner's course from the University of Law in London.
That's right.
And so Sua, you're welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
And just before we get into this, I just want to explain for people who are viewing this for the first time that the purpose of this podcast is basically to get people to share their stories of how they have gotten to where they are and the challenges that they've had to face, to getting to where they are. And it's not to publicize anyone. A lot of the things we share about on this podcast are very personal, but our aim and our hope is that somebody's going to watch one of the episodes and identify with what the interviewees share and basically learn from that experience and also push forward to become the best version of yourself that you could become. So that's kind of what we're doing. Yeah. So Sua, very well welcome once again to this podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. You came to the UK. I mean, this podcast is actually going to be a bit different to the ones we've done before, because the ones we've done before have been predominantly focused on people's career progression, so from here to here to here to here.
Okay.
And we also haven't had very many women. So this is different in its own way.
Yes.
Okay, and then also we're not going to be focusing too much on you worked here and you worked here and you worked here. But we're going to be focusing more on the challenges that I know you have overcome. And again, because I've known you, and I sort of know your story, and I know that you're somebody who has been very, very resilient. So you came to the UK at 15 years.
That's right.
To study. Tell me a bit about that experience.
Sure. So yes, I came to the UK at the age of 15. I lived in Ghana. I was born in Ghana. I left my parents, my siblings, everyone that I knew back home. And actually before that, so I went to Christ the King International School in Ghana, and in the very early years, sort of around the age of 9 to 10, I was plagued with these, I had lots of stomach issues. We sort of gone through a whole load of investigative work, and I was being tossed from hospital to hospital, and I remember having to miss quite a lot of school. And what I remember vividly was coming out of hospital. This was no more than 10 or 11 years old. I had this innate sense of really wanting to do well, and knowing that because I had missed a lot of school, I had a lot of catching up to do. So a child that young, I would come home from hospital and you'd find me at 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning with my books, revising, making sure that, and we used to have prize giving days and things in school. So I wanted to make sure that no one overtook my position.
No, I know where the competitive streak is from.
Right, exactly. So I was burning the midnight oil at a very, very early age. And I would come to London often on holiday and, in the summer holidays. And I remember seeing these kids in school uniforms. And it sounds quite fickle, but I remember just being so attracted to their school, the color of the uniform. It was like a royal blue and red, and they wore this pretty kilt. And I said, this is the school I want to go to. And fast forward, at the age of 15, that's exactly what happened. I came to the UK, and that's the exact school I ended up going to.
Wow.
And as, the new girl from Ghana with a Ghanaian accent, I remember, people took to me very quickly. They liked my personality. I was quite a shy student, or teenager even. And I remember very well, they struggled a lot with pronouncing my name. And so teachers very quickly, and actually that aligns, I think, with
Dawud. Dawud, yeah.
Who mentioned they very quickly renamed me. They would reference me. When they're going through the registry, and the teacher pauses, and immediately, okay, that's me. That's my name. And they called me the special one. And they called me the special one because academically, I was sort of head and shoulders above a lot of the students. I was, top of class for all the subjects. And I look back, and that was actually, from my perspective, pretty incredible, because I'd come from the way that we study, the way that we learn in Ghana, which is very theoretical. You can chew and pour, as we say.
Yeah.
You revise, and then all you have to do is regurgitate it onto a piece of paper, and that's good enough to get you through. Whereas I came to England and realized very quickly that wasn't going to work. There's a real need to have this practical, be able to apply yourself practically and understand and ask questions and challenge yourself. So I had to very quickly make that transition and apply myself and do well. And I did. I did, did relatively well, represented my school and major events across the country. So I did it at the age of 15.
Wow. Anyway, so something else that I know that happened was, even though you said you did well and all that, you also became a bit distracted.
Indeed.
Was it by the freedom? Was it by the, the experience of being in a foreign land? What was this distraction about? And how did this affect your A-levels?
All of the above. So I think those of us who have teenage children, and I'm actually glad that I wasn't a teenager in today's world with social media and everything else that kids get distracted by. But back then, it was very much the realization that yes, I left home. I didn't have the gaze of my parents on me. My family here was also relatively strict, but it took quite a while for me to understand that London was going to be very, very different from the life that I had in Ghana. Ghana, there was a certain level of freedom. You could go, you're seldom in the confines of your home. You're in your neighbors' houses, you're going to Tesana clubs, swimming. That was the lifestyle that I was used to. And so I expected the same when I came to England, to the annoyance of my family here. So especially when I would have friends who would come over from Ghana in the summer holidays, I wanted nothing more than to spend as much time going to the cinema, coming home chilling. Essentially, that was it. So I took my eye off the ball. I became so engrossed in that sort of lifestyle, and before I knew it, it was time to sit my A levels, and I didn't do nearly as well as I had done. Still relatively okay, but compared to how well I did in my GCSEs, there was a clear, it was clear that I'd lost my way. And so what that meant was that the universities that had offered me places, those slipped through my fingers. And for anyone who's ever been through the clearance process will know that it's a very humbling experience. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I think more so knowing within myself what I was capable of. It was the sort of the beginning and the realization that, and there's nothing worse than when you could have done better. And it was something that I just had to live with. I applied to Kingston University. I still live within the same area. The same vicinity. and was lucky enough to get accepted. And actually back then their legal faculty was fairly well revered and respected. So that's where I ended up.
Oh, great. I also know that, and again, the theme of this podcast is basically getting people to share the experiences of difficulties that they've had to go through. I also know that you became homeless at a stage.
Yes.
How did that experience, I know you left home with your belongings in a black bag or a couple of black bags. What did that do to you as a person?
So I thought about this actually before this conversation, only because I actually came to the realization that my eldest daughter is the same age that I was when that experience happened.
Okay.
And I cannot begin to imagine as a mother now with my child in another country going through that kind of experience and not demanding that she come back home. Because my mum was in Ghana, my parents were in Ghana and I was here when that happened. And it was extremely challenging, to say the least. Challenging is an understatement. There's nothing scarier than when you're in a foreign country and everything that and as much as the family that you're with, and all of that sort of changes overnight. But as difficult as it was the beginning of me really being able to. It was both a pivotal and a defining moment in my life, really, because I think you go through something like that and it can go so many different ways. You can easily fall into the wrong crowd. You can get the distraction can continue, and you can end up going a completely different way. And I was very conscious of that. And I come from a family. I have incredible role models, and my father and my great grandfather before him. And I knew that I couldn't disappoint, even though it was a challenging time and it was very burdensome. I knew that it was such a pivotal time that whatever I did beyond that was going to define the course of my life. And so I was lucky enough. There was a lady at church with the help of another aunt who took me in, and she encouraged me. It actually coincided with going through that clearance process, and there was a lot of uncertainty around that time. So I got accepted to Kingston, and she really pushed me. She said, "Look, go for it. Do the best you can, and you've got a good head on your shoulders. You can do it." So yes, confidence had to be rebuilt. But in retrospect, it some way, somehow, I was able to realize the situation for what it was. And I really think it really, really molded me into who I am today.
Yeah, so that's very interesting point that you made there. I also know that you decided to pursue a career in law, and I think the reason for that probably is because you come from a long line of legal people. Can you just tell us a bit about that experience and the challenge that you went through in university? And I also know that you met your husband in first year of university.
Yes.
And I think got married not long after that.
Yes.
And had your first daughter in your final year. Tell us a bit about that experience.
So I think what you just said there is probably what not to do, right? This is textbook what not to do. But I wouldn't change it for the world, because again, I think it's really set the course of my life and and where I am today. But yes, I come from my mother's brother, who lived with us at a point in Ghana, is a lawyer. He has a renowned law firm back home. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was also a very well-respected. In fact, he was a chief. He was a king of Winneba, the Futu state, Nana Yubiakwa the third. He went on to. He was one of the first men in Africa to get an OBE from the late Queen Elizabeth. In fact,
I saw the picture. Yeah, I saw the picture. We'll share that with you. Yeah.
So I come from a lineage and a line of people that, and then my father wasn't a lawyer, but he was also a very well respected economist.
He's an economist, isn't he?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that's where that passion, that idea came from, to go into that field. And also because as a child, as a person, one of the greatest values that I hold in high esteem is just doing the right thing. It's just an innate, feeling and value that I hold very dear. And so you can see how that aligns very well with law, right? And so that's where that idea came from. And so I met my husband in the first year of my time in Kingston University.
Okay.
We actually didn't meet. I was working. I had to take on a job to pay my way through. So I was supporting myself essentially on my own.
Wow.
Because coincidentally, even though, like I said, my father was pretty well to do, it just so happened coincidentally that in that time he was also going through a pretty tricky time.
Yeah.
So it meant that I was on my own. And so I took on a job. It was a sort of a telemarketing role back then. And that's where I met Michael. He was also sort of in between jobs. He was in his early 20s. I was sort of just about to turn 19. Yeah. And so we met there. And what I can say about those early, sort of the first year in university, and there's a theme, clearly, because the distraction continued. The distraction continued. Naturally, you meet a guy. I met Michael in my first year.
Yeah.
And
handsome young guy.
And the focus that I had sort of, gained. And if he was here, he'd be like, excuse me, don't blame me for that. But the reality was, I sort of kind of, got distracted. It was we got serious quite quickly. So much so that in my second year, towards the end of my second year, we got married.
Okay. And
by my final year, I was pregnant with our first daughter.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
So what happened thereafter? Because I know that your pregnancy was difficult. Again, the purpose of this podcast is to let people know, especially mothers and people like that, that the situations and challenges that you go through, others have been through them, and you can draw some strength from their stories. Right. So I know your pregnancy was particularly difficult. It was. And you were prescribed bed rest pretty much throughout the pregnancy.
Correct.
And this was in your final year?
It was in my final year.
I mean, what happened? Tell me.
Yes, so I found out I was pregnant in my final year, and just my luck, it was exactly like you said. I was put on bed rest, such that I didn't have the strength, the energy to do anything. So here I was, having been fairly distracted in the course of my first to second year, married, basically doing everything you were not supposed to do as a student at university. And then in my final year, when really that was the time to sort of sit up and really get serious, I was pregnant and could do barely anything. And so on one fine day, I get a letter through the mailbox and opened it, and it said, long and short, I'd been taken off the course. And you can imagine, all of a sudden, sort of, it hit me like a ton of bricks that there's that, based on the family that I'd come from, the struggles that I'd gone through to get to that point, the prior distractions that I supposedly would have learned from, all of that sort of culminated and got me thinking, I have to fight this. There is no way I'm going to just sit back and let this dream be taken away from me. And also, not least because I was working diligently. And again, not a recipe for success at that time, because I was having to skip lectures to work to support myself through university.
Wow.
I mean, that is not how it's supposed to work.
Wow.
So the sacrifices I'd had to make quite early on, I knew that I couldn't let that go down the drain. So I challenged it. I wrote a letter. I really made sort of a, put all my submissions. It was the beginning of really being able to show my legal training. And I put that forward, and they accepted it, and they sort of reinstated my place on the course. But what they did do was give me a month. A month. Wow. They gave me a month. I remember receiving the letter. I sort of double checked the calendar. I was like, hang on, that's a month they've given me to revise and be ready for the exams. Meanwhile, I was 7 months pregnant.
Wow.
By the time I got that letter. So I sat my final exams. Mind you, first year I was very subpar. Second year I was married, having a good old time. And then final year, I've got a month to prepare for essentially the whole course.
Yeah.
And so it was one of the biggest tests academically, even though I was a fairly bright child, but this went beyond anything I've ever known. And so it was also a test for Michael as in our early days of our relationship, where he literally went into the library with me every day for that month, and we would study. He learned law because he's very sharp, very academic, and we learned it together. And I sat my exams 3 weeks before I had Ella.
Wow.
Yes, and passed. I mean, I didn't do astoundingly well, but I did much better than you.
That's crazy. I can't believe being pregnant, having been kicked off a course, and being given 1 month. Effectively, you're being set up to fail.
Absolutely. That's
it sounds like me, like being set up to fail.
That is exactly what it felt like. But I wasn't going to give in without a fight. I thought, I'm going to do the best that I can. That's all I can do. And if that works out, then great. And if it doesn't, then at least I know I can walk away knowing that I didn't give up. And I persevered, and I made a way through it.
Good. Thereafter, you tried to get a pupillage, but then you came to the conclusion that perhaps maybe your grades didn't kind of basically position you in a very good light.
That's right.
Tell us a bit about that experience and what happened.
Sure. So I think through my law degree, a lot of my peers at the time were already applying for their training contracts, naturally also as distracted doing her own thing. So
whilst you were getting married.
While I was getting married. That was the least of my worries. I thought, I've got time to do that. So, after uni, by then I had a newborn, and priorities had completely shifted. And so I thought, look, the race isn't for the swift. I can do this. I'll do this in my own time. And so I put that on the back burner. But then what happened was in my own time, I then started making applications for the training contract. And anyone watching who has gone through that process of applying for training contracts will know that it's not for the faint-hearted. You have to be ready and prepared to receive a lot of rejection. It's one of the biggest tests to your confidence, to, and for me, there's only that much rejection one person can take. When you're on your 20th application and, they're coming back, majority of the time you're not hearing from anybody. But when you're lucky enough to, you just have to read that first line. And it's not even worth reading the rest of it. And it became a theme, and it got to the point where I just decided I can't do this. I knew friends who had done 100 training applications. I'll be honest and say I didn't do anywhere near that. So maybe if I had, done 50 or so more, then perhaps, but I didn't have it in me to do that. So I thought, look, there's an opportunity to be creative here and see whether there's another route to this, to getting to where I wanted to get to. And so I decided to go and work.
Okay.
But I made a conscious decision at that time to also find a smaller law firm to work in, because I felt like a bigger law firm, it would be quite a challenge getting there because of the grades that I had. Let's be truthful, but also I felt that a smaller law firm would also give me an opportunity to get my hands dirty in various
things,
areas, because the bigger the firm, you're likely going to be stuck in one area. And so I got an opportunity to work as a paralegal for a Central American law firm, very, very well respected in that part of the world. And exactly that, they gave me an opportunity. One day I was writing board resolutions, the next day I was interviewing clients, the next day I was doing, sort of KYC, due diligence type tasks. And so it really gave me a feel for, the beginnings of like the legal profession, things that my peers that I'd speak to who were actually doing training contracts had not had an opportunity to do yet.
Understood.
Some were still sort of doing coffee runs, for months on end, and hadn't had an opportunity to actually get to do some work. So I realized quite early on that was a privilege, and that was the right path to have taken. I then got pregnant with my second daughter.
Wow. You had it all mapped out.
Yes.
Just when you're getting some stability.
That's right.
You threw a span on the work.
Well, one of my managers has said to me that, Sua, you clearly don't like the easy life. Like things always have to be very complicated for you to thrive and emerge. But yes, so I got pregnant with my second daughter, and then decided to sort of take a step back, through maternity, and then replan and decide where it was I wanted to go from then on. So what I did after I'd had Eden, my second daughter, I decided, okay, now was the time to do this law school thing.
Okay.
So I applied to, it was called the University, the College of Law at the time, which is one of the best law schools here in London. And I got a place in Guildford. And I remember starting, it was a full-time place. I wasn't quite sure financially how I was going to back it up.
Yeah.
But being the dreamer and this positive person that I was, I knew that somehow it would, it would come together. And so I started the course, and I remember in the first week, I just felt this unsettled, like I wasn't supposed to be there for some strange reason. But also in tandem with that, I'd also made an application to another company to work in their legal department. So just when I was sort of trying to decide, what is this feeling? Why do I feel so out of place? That company got in touch with me, and I started an interview process with them. Long story short, they gave me a role, and it was to work in their legal department. And I made the crazy decision to drop out of law school and go and work for these people. And everyone thought I was losing it, but I don't know, I just had this inkling that it was the right thing to do at that particular time in my life. And so I did, and we were actually going through a pretty tricky time with our second daughter. She was probably about 1.5, 2 at that time. And so just learning, being able to apply myself in that particular time, it just didn't, I didn't think I had it in me. So I started working for these people, and actually the lady who gave me that break, a lady by the name of Helena Samaha, who's now CEO of a huge organization, Lex Mundi. They manage a directory for law firms. She gave me my first break. And before long, I built this fantastic relationship also with our general counsel, a guy by the name of John Collins, Detroit, he hails from Southfields, really, really nice man, who almost became like a sort of grandfatherly figure in my life. I could speak to him, about personal things that were happening in my life, and he would really sort of take me under his wing and advise me. And I was able to confide in him and, share my aspirations to qualify. And before long, it was sort of, I want to say 3 to 6 months. This man just calls me one afternoon and says, Sua, we will support you. We will sponsor you to go to law school.
Wow.
Yes. And so tens and thousands of pounds, he, well, not him personally,
Yeah, the
but
company.
the company
Firm, yeah.
put me through law school.
That is amazing. So you basically started law school, quit after a few weeks, whatever it is. You started to go and work, and then you ended up having your law training at the end.
That's right.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's right.
I also know that somewhere along the line, I'm not going to say where, but somewhere along the line, and because I've known you so long, I know your stories, but somewhere along the line, you were you working on retail at the same time as working in law?
No. So I was working in a legal capacity.
Okay.
And I remember, going through a pretty tricky time because, again, if you think about my background and the fact that, a young lady who was born in Ghana and that, for the best part of those, those formative years, prejudice and discrimination and racism was abstract, right? I didn't have a lived experience of it. And so coming to this country, in all honesty, it was probably a time where even if people were being prejudicial,
it was acceptable.
It was acceptable to some extent, and sometimes it wasn't even covert enough for you to notice, right? Because you're just not used to. You don't even. It's afterwards where you think, hang on, is that
right?
Yeah.
Did I hear that right?
Yeah, like it didn't actually register for what it was.
Yeah.
But as time went on and you began to get those, the rude awakenings of all that sort of behavior represents, then it becomes clear what's happening. And in that particular instance, sort of very early on in my career, I remember having a conversation with one of my superiors and saying, look, I felt that I'd been in the organization for quite a while. Now I know better, but I felt that I was worthy of a salary review. And again, I put my case forward for for why I felt I was deserving. I didn't just go and say that, I actually made a case for why. And this lady looks at me, sort of laughs and says, look, you're lucky to be here, essentially. You should be happy. There are people off the streets, who would be ecstatic with half the money that you're on.
Wow.
She actually mentioned other nationalities that in her eyes were, probably a bit less deserving, and they would be happy with half of the money I'm on. So essentially, the audacity for me to come and ask for that. And then when she went on to say, which I feel at the time she probably felt that it was a sort of a back-ended compliment.
Yeah.
Because I was known for, the way that I present myself, the way that I would dress. And so she said, look, you'd be better off working in retail, than in this legal capacity. And it, again, that experience, hearing those words, and I think the person that I was back then also, my go-to was just to cry. And I remember sitting there and I could feel the heat from the back of my eyes, like the droplets about to fall. And I was like, I'm not going to cry in front of this woman. I'm not going to do this. Yeah. And I just said, okay, thank you. Shut my laptop and I left. And again, in retrospect, I didn't handle it very well.
Okay.
I didn't. It was so alien to me. I felt so belittled. All of those emotions, and I wasn't wrong to feel that way, right? Because it wasn't right. But I also know now, from maturing, from having gone through so many other experiences, a broad spectrum of microaggressions, all the way to more covert forms of overt forms of racism. I now know that the way that you have the power, and you can choose how you react and how your attitude towards these things are. And there's a lot of power in being able to realize that in that situation, because you can get very easily carried away. And there's no wrong or right as such, because when something is bad, it's bad, and you're in but I kind of got really, really carried away, and I made it eat at me, and it really, really knocked my confidence, because already you're finding yourself in this environment where you feel like you don't belong. There's no representation. You don't see people like you in that environment, and here you are having someone confirm that and say that you're not worthy in a sense. So it took a lot of I had to do a lot of introspective work and realize my worth. And that was hard because, you know, like I've shared of my career up to that point, there'd been lots of moments, twists and turns that I myself was going through a lot of, I'd say, imposter syndrome.
Okay.
So yes, it was tough, but it could have been worse.
Okay, before we go on to the next phase of this interview, you've always been a very stylish person, a very dressing, and you know, where's that from?
So my mother is, and I say was because she no longer does it, but she was a very well-known fashion designer in Ghana, and for children. And in fact, all the women in my family, my mother is a twin, her twin sister still to this day is very well known for the beautiful clothes that she makes. My sister is in that business. Majority of the women in my family. And I grew up as a child actually on the catwalk. Like my mum would throw all these fashion shows and the biggest Labadi and Golden Tulip back then, and I would model. I would open the shows, etc. So I developed this real passion and appreciation for not just fashion in the sense of, you know, just the look of clothes, but the sense of power that one can feel just by how they clothe themselves. And that's certainly been my experience. I know that when I dress well in the way that I you know, I feel empowered, I feel bolder, I feel more confident. And so that's something that I've always done and I've always paid attention to.
I was going to say something about I'll leave that. You know, so you're a very ambitious person because I've known you for many years, and if you ask me to describe you with one word, I would say ambitious. How important do you think ambition is to a person's ability to overcome adversity as you have done?
That is it's so interesting when you have an idea of who you are and how you show up in the world, and so I find it always very interesting when someone who knows me speaks to what they see, right? Because it can be very different from what you believe in yourself. I would never think of myself as someone who's very ambitious, not least because I feel like I've always, and this actually, I think we touched on this, that when I've looked at the discussions that you've had with the inspiring gentleman that you have, and the trajectory, granted, perhaps I have a few more, number of years more to go to get there, but their trajectory has been so granted, they've had their own challenges that they've spoken to. But then when I look at myself and, you know, to all the things that I've spoken about, and then to my role as a mother, I feel like I have, in a sense, I could be much further along career-wise, but I've had to make a conscious decision also to pace myself and to ensure that there is a real balance constantly being struck that allows me to be able to do the best that I can in both roles, i.e., well, not even both roles, my role as a wife, as a mother, and as a professional. So ambition, I feel, hasn't come to me naturally. It's been something that I've had to, over the years, constantly fine-tune. I've had to rely on others. My husband has been instrumental where he has had, in his own masculinity, from a cultural and a traditional sense, he's had to take a step back sometimes to support me in, you know, in realizing my own dreams, and that takes a lot for, you know, for a man to do. Maybe now it's a bit more, you know, you see and hear that more, but back then, some 15 years or so ago, it was incredible, you know, for him to be able to do that so that I could move ahead and advance in my career. But I've always, to your point about ambition, I think I've always had this innate sense of I want to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I have these role models in my life that I have to
Emulate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's sort of been my North Star.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, moving on, this aspect of our interview is probably, personally for me, the most difficult, and our viewers will soon know why. But perhaps let me just broach the subject by asking if you can tell us about the Eden Rose project. Okay, and the reason why I say this is difficult is, oftentimes people project an image of success, they project an image of invincibility, they project an image of everything's okay, okay, fine, there are a few bumps in the road,
Right.
but overall everything's okay. But again, I know you, and this aspect of what we're going to talk about is something that culturally even people don't want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
People kind of want to hide the reality, but then we can't hide it.
Right.
And so this interview is very different to all the interviews I've done before, because this brings out some real stuff,
Mm-hmm.
some real personal stuff. And again, we can't go into everything, but like I said, maybe let's just start by just telling us a bit about the Eden Rose project.
Sure, my pleasure. So the Eden Rose project, Eden Rose is my second daughter's name. Her name is Eden Rose, and she's 13. Eden was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3, and saying it was challenging would be an understatement. I mean, we knew nothing about autism, so we got thrown into this world of the unknown, where she just happened to go to nursery, and we got pulled aside by one of the teachers who just said, look, she mentioned the A word to us for the first time and said, this is our concern. We feel like she is on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. So it was a baptism of fire. We had to really, myself and Michael, school ourselves on what that meant, what we could do for our daughter to support her, and really advocate for her, because she had the classic signs, and we were none the wiser. We had no idea. I think culturally, when you call parents and you're like, oh, she's not talking as much, like, oh, it's fine, you didn't, well, not me personally, but they're children who don't talk until it's fine, don't worry, you're giving this too much attention, you just need to commit it to prayer and leave us at that. Now, while that's all fair and well, I also came to know that practically there were things that I needed to do to to move things along, and so anyway, we'll probably speak to a bit more of that later. But the Eden Rose project is essentially Eden Rose, now that she's 13, coming to me one fine day and saying, Mum, the heart that child has, she has a big heart, very, very empathetic to a fault. And she said, Mum, I really want to help children like me. I want to be able to talk about my journey, share my story, and I want to name it the Eden Rose Project. And so I laughed, I chuckled, I said, okay, well, that's very creative, the Eden Rose Project. And she looks at me and says, actually, it's not. Eden Rose, yes, it's self-named, but it also signifies the fact that Eden rose up above her challenges to help others. Okay. And I was in awe. I said, absolutely, I'm at your service. Wow. I will help you. I will support you through this. And that was about a year ago. So fast forward to today, Eden has spoken at several schools within our borough.
Okay.
She's spoken to whole key stage groups from the ages of 5 right up until her year group, and speaks so confidently, so boldly about her journey, the challenges that she's had, but also takes time to share her passion, which is the piano. She's completely self-taught.
Really?
This child, we've never had a piano teacher. Someone gifted her a keyboard a couple of Christmases ago during COVID, and we wake up one day literally and just hear this sound coming out from, and I assumed that it was the next door neighbor because they have grandchildren that play the piano, and lo and behold, it was Eden. And so she self-taught herself, and she's gone beyond that and composes her own pretty complex musical compositions.
Wow.
she plays. You hear her playing, well-known composers' music, and it's something to behold. So she also plays her compositions for these children when she goes to the schools and for the parents, and it brings so much purpose for me personally and for her, but just me as a parent, knowing the struggles, and the struggles haven't ended. There's still lots of challenges. They change as they grow older. But seeing how emotional these parents are, and the hope that it provides is really, it reconfirms that she's doing the right thing, and she's doing exactly what parents like us need. Yeah.
So, what is it like being the parent of a child with autism? Is there help, out there? Are there organizations and bodies that exist to kind of help you to adapt to that reality, or are you kind of left on your own, to your own devices?
It's an easy question, but it's a really difficult answer. Not least because, and I think people often say that also you're lucky to be in this part of the world, because the perception is that there's a lot of support and there's a lot of advancement, and while that's right, I mean, people are less ignorant. People know about autism now. Not so much. I think some 10 years ago, it wasn't as big a topic as it is now. But it's challenging in more ways than I could ever articulate. It's their joyous, beautiful moments. I'm not going to sit here and paint it in a horrible light, because you, as a parent of a child or children who have special needs, you really begin, more than you would with a neurotypical child, you appreciate, I appreciate the biological process so much more. You don't, as a parent, you naturally, I never, with my first daughter, ever considered, I always knew that she would talk. I always knew that I would go to schools and say, oh, my daughter will go to this school. And sure enough, that's where she went. But when you have a child with autism, those expectations that you have as a parent, it doesn't go that way. And if you're, thankfully, I'm a woman of faith. It's a lesson in realizing that a lot of this is out of your control. And if you don't have that faith, and that realization that there's only that much you can do as a human being, as a person, to support these children, I can't imagine how much more challenging it will be. So in a very roundabout way to the question that you asked me, there are organizations that support, and by organizations I mean depending on the needs of your child, because it is a very broad spectrum. If your child has challenges, it's a social sort of communication. I don't want to call it because there's also a lot of debate in the autism community about how to even refer to it, whether it's a disability, whether it's a syndrome. But I just refer to it as a condition. And so you can get speech therapy, yes, but it's not easy. It's very, very challenging. A lot of the time you have to go private because the numbers of children who have autism has skyrocketed. So the system, they're struggling to be able to provide support. And then things like OT, occupational therapy, similarly, that's a huge struggle. And you need educational psychologists, depending on how autism presents itself in your child. Maybe your child might have seizures, for instance. You will also have neurologists on call to help manage seizures. There's a whole raft of professionals that are involved in the care of a child. And then depending on how profound the child's needs are as well, you have things like sort of day carers who come in to support the family and relieve you because it's
it can be draining.
It's extremely draining. Yeah.
And again, this is a very difficult difficult stage of the interview for me to even ask. It's challenging enough to have one child who's autistic. but to have two, and it's even different because in their the conditions are different. It's not even like you can say that you've learned from the experience of the first one,
right,
to prepare you for the second, because it's just different experiences.
That's right. Yes.
How have you coped?
It's been again, challenging is an understatement. It's been very, very tough, and I think I didn't realize, actually. I remember when I was pregnant with my youngest, Everrain, someone asking me at the time that, are you scared? Have you considered the fact that your unborn child could be on the spectrum as well? And I remember being so offended. I thought, how dare you ask me that? Why would she ask me that? And I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know at the time that when you have a child on the spectrum, the probability of having another child on the spectrum is much, much higher.
Oh,
not to say that would have changed anything, but I think if I had that awareness, I probably wouldn't have been so... I went through a lot of denial and the shock of it all, going through this journey again. But I think what made it all the more challenging the second time round, like you rightfully said, very, very different. They say in the autism community, you meet one child with autism and you've met one child with autism. Very, very different. Even in the same family as siblings, they couldn't be any more different. There's some similarities here and there, which is what actually attuned us to the fact that this thing is here again. But they're also really, 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 really different. What made it challenging this time round was the fact that Everrain was born just before COVID. And so she lived the majority of her life through this pandemic. And I know now that a lot of the children who were born through that period actually do have social communication challenges, because they didn't, for the best part of their lives, all they knew was they just knew their families. Everyone had masks up until recently, so they didn't even know the function of the mouth. So that you go to nurseries now and they tell you, like they're actually doing studies now, that there's a lot of cases of biting now, and these aren't even children who have special needs, just children in general, because now that the masks have come off, and they're like, well, what is this? What is the purpose of the mouth beyond eating? Let me bite. So it meant that it was really hard to distinguish and decipher whether it could be, because I had other friends whose children are neurotypical who would say, she's also, my son is also very delayed with speech. But then we began to see the same telltale signs, the signs that Eden was showing, and it became clear that there was a lot more than just, the pandemic having impacted her. So Ever at the moment at 3.5, she's completely nonverbal, which is a challenge. You need some level of verbal communication to be able to. If a child is crying, you have no idea why. She has. It's hard to even speak on it. She has a lot of sensory sensitivities, meaning that her senses, she's hypo and hypersensitive. So to give you an example, everything goes in her mouth. You cannot leave her for a second. Eyes constantly have to be on her, because it's everything. It's stones, it's cream, it's soap, it's everything. But also it's again, because she can't verbalize, the sensation of even things like just clothing causes some level of pain. So she will rip things off in the dead of winter when it's freezing cold. You get to the nursery and she's stripped everything off. And these nursery teachers are, they're struggling, right? Because they have other children to look after. But these are just, the sensory needs literally touches on every aspect of life. You don't quite appreciate until you have a child whose the senses are completely out of whack, from the vestibular, just her balance. She has a bit of a gait when she walks. There's a lot of drool. There's the list goes on. It's extremely challenging.
Anyway, so you've really I know it's been difficult to talk about this, but I think it's important, like I said, because there are others who are going through these types of challenges and maybe haven't had the courage to share their experiences. That it's possible to love these children.
Absolutely.
To accept them.
Yeah.
Because they are beautiful in their own ways. I mean, look at Eden. I just love her to bits. And I find this story, or this aspect of the story, particularly encouraging, because I know many people who have children, maybe not autism, but other conditions.
Absolutely.
That it completely takes them off track, and they're not quite sure, what to do in terms of career-wise. Because it all has implications.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's times when you probably haven't been able to go for certain jobs because it would have meant you traveling and being away from the family. And the nature of your setup is that you need that kind of support. Also from Michael, your husband and all that. It's particularly encouraging.
I've had to take a conscious decision at various points in my career when I could have taken bigger roles with, that would mean I'd be traveling all over the world with bigger responsibilities. And this isn't at all to downplay, my current role. It's perfect, allows me to be able to balance my life. It works for me perfectly. But it's meant that I've really had to be very, very conscious and prioritize at all times my children. Because that's what comes first.
So Sua, as we wrap up this interview, what motivates you? What gets you out of bed in the mornings?
The children. Not least because that little girl doesn't sleep.
Right.
So she gets me. They really do motivate me. They want me to aspire and keep things going and be the best version of myself. I'm also motivated by those that have come before me. My father. And the legacy that they've left, and knowing that I have to keep that going. But I'm also motivated. I'm honestly really motivated. I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here, but I'm motivated by you and what you're doing, because I feel like we cannot underestimate the impact of some of these stories being told. And I'm not even thinking about my own story. I'm thinking about the fact that to the point that we spoke about, that we all have inspirational characters in our lives, and it's unfortunate sometimes you only realize how great these people are when they're no longer here with us. And so the ability to be able to do something like this, to almost immortalize some of these conversations and some of these learnings that will hopefully inspire people to come, that is a huge it's the right thing to do. And I'm really, really motivated by it, because I feel like you've for as long as I've known you, you've always paid it forward. You've always invested. Ella, you invested in her so early on. You saw her, you saw the promise that she had. You gave her an opportunity to stand on a stage, and it's still paying dividends. She's so confident now, and I know that all of that has, they've been building blocks for where she is today. So I'm really motivated by the incredible people that God has placed in my life. I am.
Fantastic. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, all too soon, we have to bring this podcast to a close. And like I said right at the start, this particular episode is very different to the ones we've done before. And I'm sure now you understand why I said that. And Sua, I just want to say a very big thank you for the opportunity. Because I ask people sometimes, like, I don't want to do it, but I asked you, and you kind of saw the bigger picture. You kind of seen what we're trying to do, and you decided to support us with your story. And for that, I can only say we are eternally grateful. And I pray that God will continue to strengthen you and your family, and continue to push on and keep going.
Thank you.
Keep going, because you have an inspirational story.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm really, really honoured, and I hope for anyone watching, you're also very encouraged, and if there's anything that you can take away from the discussion today, is just to stay the course, know what the end goal is, and no matter the twists and turns, because the challenges will come, but realizing that it's how you respond to those and your attitude to those that's really going to enable you to reach those goals. So thank you.
So if people want to find out more about the Eden Rose Project, is there a website?
There is a website, yes.
Okay.
It's www.edenroseproject.com. And she also has an Instagram page where she shares snippets of her journey. So please do follow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, if you liked this episode, I'd like you to leave some comments in the comment section below. I'd also like you to share this video to as many people as possible, and also to subscribe, because it's very important. We're trying to build a platform, and without subscriptions, the more subscriptions we have, the easier it will be to get some people onto this podcast. So it's very, very important that you leave comments, you like, you share, and you subscribe. And finally, I'd also want you to check out the Eden Rose Project, edenroseproject.com.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and also check out Eden Rose's Instagram page for some inspirational stories. So thank you very much once again,
Thank you.
and see you next week.
Thank you.